So thank you for the invite, and it's lovely to be able to join the meeting after the cancellation from January. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk through a set of slides that hopefully will give you some of the background, and the title is the key bit for me, is that why pharmacy must get involved in data-driven medicines optimization. And hopefully you'll see through this, it's not going to be lots of papers, it's going to be actually a more, it's a holistic view, partly from me, but certainly built from others as well. So I suppose the first point is that it used to be that the world's most valuable resource was oil. And that's actually changed over recent years. And it is now actually data that feeds the largest companies across the globe, that actually delivers enormous profits for many of them. But it is so important about utilizing data in an effective way. And that's not just in health, that's across the entirety of our daily lives. I suppose you could question, is data the new oil? And this is a great slide from the Health Foundation from a couple of years ago. And I would say that COVID has actually both driven improvements in use of data, as the poster was just talking about from Wales. England had a similar approach to looking at how we provide mutual aid and look at stocks. But data is like oil, and it needs pipelines to get it around. It's fairly useless unless it's processed into something that is either information or intelligence, or even most preferably some wisdom as to what it actually means. So it is similar to oil, and similar to oil, it also has sustainability and environmental impacts, in that data is one of the biggest users of electricity across the globe in terms of housing it and processing it. So it is very, the parallels are certainly there. There's a report from, again, sort of about 18 months ago from the Health Foundation that identified that we all know the NHS generates a huge amount of data, and making better use of that growing mountain of information has both the potential to improve care, but also how we do things, how we run services, the efficiency, how we move patient care close to their homes, out of hospital care, etc. But in the main, the NHS has been failing to make the most of this data because there aren't enough people with the right analytical skills to make sense of that information that is being collected. And that investment is needed to develop that skilled analysts to unlock that potential. And that applies in all aspects of health. And obviously this conference is certainly about the medicines optimization piece. Just a couple of sort of headlines, and this is sort of public information, in as much as approximately 30% of the world's data volume that is being generated is by the health industry. By 2025, the annual growth rate for data for health will reach 36% annually, and that's 6% faster than manufacturing data, 10% than financial services, and even with everybody watching Netflix and all the streaming services, it's 11% faster than media and entertainment. The amount of data is growing really rapidly, partly boosted by the increase in electronic health records, but sensors, wearables, other technologies, and as Samir was just talking about, things like genomics data is a vast producer of new data. Virtually every aspect of the healthcare ecosystem now yields digital data, and that opportunity to leverage patient information as well as non-clinical data or product level data to support healthcare functions. And the really exciting ones is looking at how we get into population health management to actually support the NHS delivering better care for patients. But most healthcare organizations are not effectively using this to the benefit of patients or the organizations themselves. There are many organizations, and sort of the frustration from my part is people I've talked to, and it is improving now, where they have electronic prescribing systems, and you ask them what they do with it, and they look blank and say, well, it goes into the box and it makes sure that we give the drugs to the patient. Using the data, it hasn't historically been a real priority about how they get that out. We have to balance risks between all of these changes in terms of the technology and data. So we've got prescribing systems, we've got changes to dispensing systems, but we've got a transition between all of these systems. We've got to manage and administer them. So digital systems don't necessarily stop errors happening. They just change the type of error that you might have. So rather than an illegible prescription, you end up with a very clear, printed, lovely, and very certain instruction to somebody to administer a drug, which still can be wrong. And then if you're creating all of this data, the real challenge is about how do you monitor it? What do you do with it? You've got the information. How do you actually make sure that it's used? Because it's unsafe to not utilize the data effectively. But we've got things like electronic prescribing systems. We can build in human factors and design functions. We can provide decision support. We can remove repetitive tasks and simplify things. A real benefit around patient safety is looking at closed loop medicines administration, because it again helps remove some of the opportunities for errors to happen. But we need standards. We need the data to be able to flow between systems. And again, this is a medicines optimization conference. And we need to understand, and pharmacy teams need to understand, why things like dictionary of medicines and devices, why things like FHIR standards are important, because it allows us to move the information around. And I'll come a bit more into it in a minute, but we're at risk of being left behind. Patients are becoming activated because the fact that they can get information from their bank, they get information from all sorts of other places, and if we don't keep up with them, they'll start getting the information from elsewhere. So it's really important that we harness that patient activation. I would say we've got some spares in terms of my scales. We've got things like the analytics. Wearables are a massive development. I'll just mention that in a second. But again, as was mentioned, the use of artificial intelligence for analyzing things, but also how we can best use things like augmented reality for the simplest one I can think of is inhalers, and how you could potentially use things like augmented reality to support patients understanding why their inhalers changed, how to use it, how not to use it, and utilize the tools that we've got to support patients. And you know, since I prepared this, I'm sure there are new technologies that we can talk about to support the future. We've got some fantastic tools out there.
Welcome everyone to the Freelance Journalist Empowerment Conference. Freelance journalists from all across the world.
Nick, what's going on?
Next video.
Seem to have a crossed wire.
Sorry, Andrew.
No problem. So we've got some fantastic tools. So some examples are open prescribing. Ben Goldacre's work is at a product level. It is using data that has come out from processes that exist that can start looking at how and giving some markers and some indicators about how we're using medicines. Within secondary care, we've got tools such as the RxInfo Define system, which then is also now producing the monthly data feed of secondary care medicines data, which is a public-facing tool now. So Ben is doing work at looking at how they can join together the primary care and secondary care data, but it's at a product level. So they've done things like patient safety, and I'll just use an example, one of the methotrexate 10 milligram tablets over time, and some of the tools that they can provide are really important to look at how we support change, how we use time series to show improvement. And that's exactly what we do within the model health system to show how both individual trusts, but also systems and nationally, we need to change. Ben has also been doing work around the Open Safely agenda, which is at a patient level. And you may have seen some of the published papers about the fantastic COVID work they've been doing, accessing data from GP systems. And obviously with recent headlines about the future of GP data being made available, it's hugely challenging to make sure that we can explain this, and pharmacy can play a key part explaining about why it is so important to have good data that is completely protected in terms of patient identifiability, but can actually also provide support for patient care. And I suppose there's three key agenda items that we've got to balance, and it's always a balance. We've got to think about individual care. How do we look at using all of this data we've got for that individual patient in front of a GP, in front of a pharmacist, being treated through a system, and that patient, to them, that's the most important piece. But we also look at need to look at how do we look at that whole population level data gathered from multiple systems, and that's why the interoperability piece is so key. To understand the demand, understand the outcomes, and I haven't got the usual medicines optimization graphic as part of this presentation, but we have to look at what is the outcome from all of this work we're doing. We continue to look at our overprescribing. We're looking at things like the Secretary of State Commission report should be out imminently in terms of the UK's overprescribing of medicines. But unless we have good data and we've got the teams skilled enough to look at it, we can't understand the benefits to patients. And the last one is really, in terms of this, is about transparency. We all know that there is greater and greater demands for transparency about how the NHS delivers services, how people can see what we're doing. And if we've got this data, so that's why we've got the secondary care medicines data being published each month. That is every single trust's medicines issues involved by volume is public. It's not hidden anymore, which has brought some interesting conversations, but we've got to keep looking at how do we increase that transparency. Just one of the key reasons, and we've done a lot of work over the last 3 years with regard to driving the implementation of electronic prescribing medicines administration systems. And we all know the headline about reducing medication errors. We know that the evidence suggests that such systems are self-funding over 3 years. And also we know that if you look at HIMSS standards, it's really, fairly globally accepted that it's unacceptable not to have an EPMA system. Yet we've still got 30% of trusts without an EPMA. And we fully recognise that COVID has impacted on delaying the rollout of the funding that we've provided. But EPMA is that key gap in the digital infrastructure. It's what gives us that data flow to support, be it population level macro analysis, or be it that patient level local healthcare records. It's so essential to actually get that flowing. And it's not just about inpatients or discharges, it's about the outpatients. It's about how do we support the transformation of outpatients. It means that, yes, there is more time needing to be spent, and you can sort of hear the arguments about, well, clicking mice and going through entering things because you're actually driving people to do things does take more time. But then you get the benefits of reduced time and asking patients the same questions multiple times. Again, as you start then looking to add in closed loop medicine systems, and Cambridge has done some fantastic work, and Cornwall looking at what errors do you avoid, what harm to patients do you avoid. And so EPMA is a real fundamental block, which I would anticipate that all the colleagues on the call will recognise about why we need to drive this forward. I'll touch briefly on the Topol review, and Eric Topol completed this in 2019, and again the COVID sort of hiatus is sort of, it makes it seem a long time ago, but the work is still continuing around the Topol report. And there are a couple of ones just I wanted to highlight, and people may not have picked up on them. During his evidence, he talked about a couple of examples where patients and others are moving ahead, and it's sort of building on my comments earlier about we need to keep up. So Night Scout is a development. It's a crowd-sourced development in the States, and I just wanted to highlight the we are not waiting piece, because this is the parental approach sometimes from healthcare, the paternalistic approach. Patients are not waiting for this anymore; they're driving change forward. So we have to recognise that. And it was an open source DIY project that allowed access to continuous glucose monitoring data developed by patients or carers for children who had problems with blood glucose management. And this was developed despite this isn't the States, but it was despite healthcare. It was built to utilize monitoring systems. So these things are happening. Another one was Air Louisville, which was utilizing global positioning chips in inhalers, that actually every time somebody within the Louisville area utilized their inhaler, it captured where they were using it to then give indication about pollution to then say, well, these are the bits of the city that you avoid. So these are real things that have been happening globally. In reality, as well, sort of in terms of a broader reality, I'm guessing there's going to be a fair few people on the call who have some form of smartwatch. Apple obviously introduced their ECG monitoring a couple of years ago. This is my trace, so I'll be open about that. It sort of was just to show the types of things you can do. But you've also then got the trace that shows for atrial fibrillation, and I think where pharmacy needs to understand is what happens when somebody comes into their pharmacy. What happens when a patient talks to you about, well, I've got this and it's showing me this. We all need to understand that. We need to be building up our understanding of all of these new technologies, and they're moving very quickly to support patient care. And you do get the message, but sadly, Apple still say you've got to go and talk to a physician. I think they should be go and talk to a healthcare professional about, and a pharmacist should be able to support with regard to any of these type tools. Another reality, and many of you will have sort of seen the journey of Freestyle Libre. Freestyle Libre now is 2 is now available, and that then starts providing that connection into smart devices and providing data. And these are, again, it's out there, it's being utilized. It's something that everybody needs to understand. How can we help patients using their data? A bit more on the Topple report. So we tried to influence the Topple review. They developed a range of personas sort of for the future in terms of how informatics and data and digital will be going and needs to be supported by the workforce. So they talked about a nurse, they talked about a paramedic, they talked about a bioinformatician, and they talked about a doctor. We weren't successful in getting a pharmacist in there, but what we did do is on their website, they do have a persona for a pharmacist, work closely with them to actually try and sort of say, well, how would this fit with, we're trying to help future pharmacists and existing pharmacists understand why data and informatics and the use of data is so key. And the slides will be available afterwards, but it's really about trying to give a story so people understand about why somebody gets interested, why they question what we do as healthcare professionals. When a shiny new pharmacist comes out, why they then question about why they can't do certain things, why they can't use the tools that they've got. And then trying to look a bit forward in terms of crystal ball gazing about in the future, about utilizing all of the different tools to use data to support medicines optimization. If you haven't seen, there is a short life working group report commissioned by Keith Ridge. It's on the SPS website, and the link is on the slide deck when it comes around. But looking at supporting early career pharmacy professionals in data-driven care, and it tried to mirror the medicines optimization graphic about saying this is all about the patient. This is about how we drive care for that patient at a patient level. But what we have to think is about how that clinical informatics jigsaw around the patient can join together. And it's not just our part of that world, it's the pharmacy piece is there, and also the pharmacoinformatics in terms of the pharma industry. But we need to dovetail and join up with all of those other parts of the informatics system to support the patient. But we also have to recognize that there are a range of system issues around it, and that has been the challenge with driving forward electronic prescribing medicines administration. Different systems work in different ways. You've got a workforce who's mobile and moves between different organizations, and we have to think about how does that user interface, how does that functionality, how does that utility support both healthcare professionals, but also in terms of the driving the patient care. And in terms of just trying to finish off and pull this sort of together at the end, to me, there are sort of 3 overarching principles that we need to consider about when we're embedding data-driven care into practice, and this is specifically around medicines optimization. So we need to look at what enhanced learning opportunities, and conferences like this are a great one, but as we build in terms of CPPE, the undergraduates, our professional bodies and everything else, how do we provide a foundation for our pharmacy professionals to, in many cases, move from a state of denial, data denial, or a bit like Munir's slide about genomics not being important at the moment. There's lots of people who don't see why do I need to understand about data, and why are things like dictionary medicines and devices important to support that data, and how do they maintain those skills? We need to have a culture where chief pharmacists and others recognize that data-driven care is part of the role of all pharmacy professionals. And it's not just the shiny new ones, it's at all career stages. I saw a couple of consultant pharmacist colleagues on this call talking with some consultant pharmacists and supporting some of the accelerated access collaborative work looking at medicines data. It's so important that we understand how to get good data out of our systems. And one of our repeated mantras is, if it's rubbish in, it's rubbish out. We've got to help people understand why data is really important to all of them. And if we make data available, easily accessible, things like the secondary care medicines data, as I mentioned, that people can just go and have a look at, even if it's not going to give them anything, they know it's there. We can increase the engagement, and we need to empower all pharmacy professionals to look at this data and actually how they can learn from it, and we can all work together to improve medicines optimization. So Waz, hopefully that's given enough time for any questions that might be there. I can carry on going, but
no, brilliant, Andrew. That's really good, really insightful, and it's just nice to hear that people are doing things around in this field. There are a couple of questions. Sean's asking about tackling the need for a shared medical record. Is that something that you're involved in, or what's your views on that?
So I suppose it's you. I'm not directly involved. I'm interested observer, and the whole challenge about who owns data is fascinating. Sort of hearing the questions and the comments from GPs about not allowing their data to be taken and made available centrally. To me, it's the patient's data. It's always going to be the patient's data, and things like the local healthcare records developments are going to drive that. But we have to get much better at explaining why things like anonymized data, why things like shared records are important. And it's not about it's ours. It has to be it's the patient's. And you could argue that patient-held data would be better, but you've got a whole range of challenges with that. It's got to be something that actually, and if you talk to a patient, mostly you get a blank look. Why you're asking them what if you could look at their data, because of course you can. It's needed for my care. It's how do we help those arguments, and this is the hearts and minds piece, that if people understand why data is important, they can have that informed conversation with their patients.
Brilliant, thank you. Sam's got a really interesting question about the wearables and health inequalities. Do we risk pushing, making the divide in health inequalities greater for those who have the technology with those who haven't?
I think there is a risk of that, but I think sort of people will have seen during the pandemic, the NHS at home work of putting pulse oximetry into people's homes, and that was actually providing free of charge as part of the NHS. And I think that's some of the dynamics that have to change across the broader NHS, that it's actually beneficial to give certain patient cohorts, be it the example of the Air Louisville thing, that was a GPS chip, but in terms of a smartphone, or in terms of a wearable, or Freestyle Libre, or whatever it is, the benefits can outweigh the costs. And if people don't have them, it allows them to then be supported. But it's a bit like the digital divide challenge. Mm-hmm. And you can talk to different people, and they'll say, well, people don't have access to the internet, they don't have that. But then when you talk to some of the other patient groups, of course we do. We're not old and incapable. We actually utilize digital systems all of the time. So it has to be a balance.
Yeah, that's really, really helpful. There are other questions, Andrew, which I'm sure you can read and respond to in the chat, if you wouldn't mind. And obviously, there's lots of stuff going on Twitter, so please. So once again, thank you very much for taking time to present to us. It's really good, really insightful, and hopefully it gives everybody some food for thought, and really to go back into your own organisations and see what am I going to do next.
So Waz, just before we finish, can I just sort of please encourage people to look at the development of the model health system. If you work for the NHS, you can register for the model health system at model.nhs.uk. I'll put the link in, but it will give you access to see the types of things that we're doing. And so that is everything at a system level, so you at an ICS level, and you can see the organizations in that system. You need an NHS email account, but you can access it. But it's everything from sustainability to high cost drugs to total spend in the area. It's a really valuable resource, and please, I'm just encouraging people to use it. They're on Twitter. You can see things on Twitter. We're building it up, and there's going to be a lot more going into that as Waz is very much aware, pushing a lot more into that over the coming months.